Hi, I'm Jonah Comstock, Editor-in-Chief of Pharma Forum. I'm here at Reuters Pharma USA in Philadelphia. I'm joined by Blair McNeill, Senior Vice President of Cell Therapy at Sumitomo Pharma USA.
Yes.
And thank you so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure.
We're getting on towards the end of the day a little bit.
Yep.
So if I say something ridiculous, forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
But you're here to talk about cell therapy, and particularly around kind of some of the development issues. Talk to me a little bit about the panel you're going to be on. It hasn't happened yet, and what you're going to be presenting on.
I'm focused more on the manufacturing and the ideas. Do you bring it in-house to do the manufacturing? Do you outsource to a CDMO? And what are the avenues that you explore there? And what are the different considerations you have to make? How you keep that supply chain moving? And particularly when you're working in the rare and ultra-rare diseases space, what really makes the most sense? And so that's kind of the focus I'll be having on the panel. And then how we also, the complex logistics that go with actually bringing these therapies to the patients, as they're such personalized medicines, as opposed to many of our traditional therapies, which are, tablets and IV administration and things like that.
Now, in the case of your product, is it an autologous cell therapy? Does it have all that infusion stuff has to happen, or?
No, so ours is an allogenic tissue-based therapy, and ultimately it is implanted in the recipient patient's quadriceps in a surgery setting for children.
So certainly a complicated delivery mechanism, nonetheless.
Yes.
Although at least with allogenic, the manufacturing has different challenges. What are some of the challenges that you face there?
Our first challenge is getting donated thymus. So it requires a family to consent that their infant during cardiac surgery to donate eligible thymus that would be medical waste otherwise from that patient. And it's only a portion, it's not the whole thymus. That then has to be taken to our facility where it's manufactured over a 21-day period. And then it has to be immediately delivered to the patient. So right now there's very little time between the release of the product to implantation with the patient. So this all occurs in one centralized setting at Duke University today. And that's why we're building our own facility now to help expand that.
That's so interesting, because when you talk with people about cell therapy in a general sense, they say, oh, allogeneic is going to make it so much easier because you'll just be able to take it off the shelf. But that's not really true at all, is it?
No. So like I said, ours is very personalized, and it has currently has a 3-hour shelf life from when we release to when it's implanted. And we're hoping to be able to expand that to maybe 72 hours. We'll see where the science takes us, but that's still a very tight window to get it from ultimately North Carolina to elsewhere in the world.
So going back to that question that you mentioned at the beginning, do you do your manufacturing in-house or do you outsource it? What are some of the considerations there? Are you finding that there are CDMOs that are up to the challenge of helping you with this? Or?
So now when we surveyed the CDMOs that were out there several years ago, most of them really didn't understand the process, which is a very manual process. And also because we're dependent on donations for the starting material, we don't have a lot of notice of when they're coming. Sometimes we find out 24 hours, if we're lucky, ahead of time. So a traditional CDMO doesn't have flexibility in their operating schedule and manufacturing schedule to be able to take this in at a non-prescribed time. So we're setting ourselves up to be able to handle that erratic manufacturing process.
Yeah, I mean, and everyone involved has to be able to be mobilized at the drop of a hat, and including the patient. That sounds pretty daunting.
It is, and that's why it's a very complex process of having the patients ultimately, when they're diagnosed, go into, we're putting together a model of a centralized expert panel who will understand patients' needs from a medical dosing perspective. So when we receive a thymus, we can determine what that dose will be right away within the first day of manufacturing, and therefore then let the centralized committee know so they can mobilize that patient, which is also why we're looking to ultimately expand the treatment centers to a few regional ones, areas of expertise, so then that patient doesn't have to travel nearly as far to receive the treatment.
We've talked about how difficult this is and how much work it is, but I think it's my fault that I didn't ask up front about what makes it worth it. Tell me a little bit about this treatment and who it's for and what the alternatives were before it was available.
So this treatment is for children who suffer from a condition called congenital athymia, where they are born without a thymus and therefore they don't have an immune system that you and I would have. Traditionally, there's been no treatment. There's been supportive care until they unfortunately pass away from the complications of not having an immune system. This treatment, when and if they receive it, gives them a chance to reconstitute an immune system and go on to live a presumably normal life.
Wow, it's pretty hard to put a price on that.
Yeah, it's very hard to. It's one of the most intimate, rewarding programs I've ever worked on in my career.
What's the volume of patients you've been able to treat so far, just ballpark? And this new facility, how will that kind of expand the abilities?
So in the past year, we were able to treat about 15 to 16 patients. If all our plans come together, we hope to be able to make around 40 lots a year for treatments. We think the incidence in the United States is about 20 patients per year. So there's a backlog of patients, obviously, unfortunately, new patients. And then we have the desire to expand outside the United States to where this condition also exists.
Okay, but that's a manageable sort of, I mean, theoretically in the future, you could be available to almost everyone who needs it.
Yes, that is our aim and goal.
That's really incredible. This is just a great example of kind of the incredible potential of these cell therapies, and it's a really interesting one. As you kind of immersed as you are in the science, is there anything sort of exciting to you about where this technology is going to go in the years to come?
It's really exciting to think that we're able to finally go after disease states that have never had a treatment, or have the treatments that are out there are just to manage the symptoms but never really get to the root and cure the disease. And so that the fact that we can start thinking at a more molecular and genetic level of how we can change the course of the disease and make it a curative therapy is just something I've never been in. It's been a thought process when I started way back when to now it's actually starting to actually happen, and that idea of personalized medicine is becoming more and more of a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. But your case really does illustrate that, just developing the treatment is only the beginning. You have so much work you have to do to operationalize it. And that's going to be the case for every one of these. How do you think the industry is going to evolve to make these sort of less of a bespoke situation and as more of these therapies become available, make them easier to administer?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure yet because we're just trying to figure it out with some of these new ones and working with the regulators who also, this is new to them too, and finding out what that path is and how we get all these components that we're used to in your traditional therapies. There's paths and everything in the playbook, right? We're creating this as we go. And so how we can expand that in the future, some of it, like the complications around logistics, that's become a little more easier to understand because many of these are going to be that immediate release for administration on a personalized level. but some of the aspects of how you identify the patients and things like that, that's where the advancement in diagnostics and the medical treatment has to come in to help us identify these people earlier on in life.
Yeah. So there's a whole ecosystem in both directions to really solve the problems.
Yep.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thanks so much for talking with me,
Thank
Blair.
you.
Do you have anything else you want to add? Any final thoughts?
No, it's just a very exciting field, and it's very, very rewarding to be in this type of area where you actually are seeing the hard work that everyone puts in really have a direct impact on a patient, in this case on a child, to be able to go live a life.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of one of those things you only hope for in your career.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your show.